In this part of the HealthWealth Investor Toolkit video series, we continue to explore and learn about the different ways of how drug developers and drug manufacturers can actually attempt to bring the drugs in development faster through the regulatory approval pathway so that they can reach patients in an accelerated or faster way. As you can see, the FDA has many different pathways for this type of activities, and in today's video we're taking a look at breakthrough therapy. As you probably can imagine, any drug developer would want their product to go through the regulatory approval pathway as quickly as possible, because once it is commercialized, of course, the return on investment for the development can actually start to be recuperated through the sale of the drug. Now, while everybody would want this, of course, not every drug is eligible for any of the accelerated regulatory approval or review procedures and processes. So, certain requirements, minimum requirements, have to be met by a potential drug candidate in development in order to be eligible for the accelerated reviews, approvals, etc. So let's take a look concretely at what this would mean in order to be eligible for the Breakthrough Therapy designation. And on the FDA website, of course, we can find the relevant information. So first of all, Breakthrough Therapy designation is in itself a process which is designed to expedite the development and the review of drugs that are intended to, and here is one of the key words, to treat a serious condition. And preliminary clinical evidence may demonstrate a substantial improvement over available therapy on a clinically significant endpoint or endpoints. So, first of all, the keyword serious condition, let's define what that actually means. So any disease that manifests as a serious condition, if untreated, will undoubtedly result in a severe impact on either the quality of life and or the life expectancy. So if untreated, a serious condition will result in premature death or very much reduced quality of life. This is the first, hurdle or requirement that any medicine aiming to obtain breakthrough therapy must clearly meet. So then the drug in development, if it meets the first criteria of serious condition, it also means that it needs to meet the requirement that preliminary clinical evidence should show a clear advantage over available therapy. Now, we're dealing with preliminary clinical evidence in this case because we're dealing with drugs in development, which means that the clinical evidence is not fully known yet or is basically under development. Only after the conclusion of a phase 3 clinical trial is clinical evidence really irrevocably available and known. And even then, many drugs go on into the so-called phase 4 trials, which is basically, real-world evidence. And this is then part of the so-called post-market surveillance or pharmacovigilance, where any adverse effects or events are continuously reported back to the manufacturer, and they have to compile the risk management file accordingly, and that may inform the manufacturer as well as the regulatory agencies about additional, perhaps unknown effects that were not evident when the drug was used as part of the clinical trials, where, of course, the patient numbers in a trial are substantially smaller and lower than once it is commercialized, and any patient who needs the drug actually can get access to it. So then the second keyword or hurdle for breakthrough therapy designation are the clinically significant endpoints. And these, since we're dealing with serious conditions, generally measure an effect on the irreversible morbidity in case of, deadly diseases, or symptoms that present serious consequences of the disease. Key examples: cancer can be, if untreated, of course, be very deadly. In terms of Alzheimer's disease, as another example, it is also a deadly disease, but before the patient actually dies, there is the decline of cognition, And, well, that is a serious consequence of the disease. So any drug that can prolong the patient's life or avoid the decline of cognition in the case of Alzheimer's disease would be eligible, or would basically in this case have to demonstrate that these clinical endpoints really impact those measures. Otherwise, the drug candidate in development would not be eligible for the breakthrough therapy. In some cases, also so-called surrogate endpoints or intermediate clinical endpoints may be considered. Now, a surrogate endpoint in a clinical trial is another variable or an indirect measure of what the intended clinical benefit of the treatment actually is supposed to be. Now, if those can predictably actually indicate the effect, and it must be a positive effect on the serious condition or disease, well, that's another way to be eligible for the breakthrough therapy designation. And perhaps not surprisingly, since FDA drug approval hinges on safety and efficacy, and safety being a very important factor, it is also possible for a drug to receive the breakthrough therapy designation if in fact the drug may have still the same clinical benefit as another available standard line of therapy, but if the safety profile is far superior, as per the preliminary clinical data or surrogate endpoints, well, it is also eligible to receive the breakthrough therapy designation, because in that case it would limit, or expected to limit, the side effect profile. And this is oftentimes a big deal in terms of chemotherapy drugs, where toxicity, etc., is really a key point. You may wonder what's in it for the drug developer to apply and ask to receive a breakthrough therapy designation. Well, the answers are actually right here. So, if a drug receives breakthrough therapy designation, it becomes eligible for all the fast track designation features, and I have a specific video on that in the HealthWealth Investor Toolkit series. I leave a link here. And there is intensive guidance on the efficient drug development program from the sides of the FDA, beginning really as early as the phase 1 clinical trials, and FDA organizational commitment involving all the senior managers. And this will undoubtedly also help with the type of clinical data the FDA expect. So any alignments here will help the FDA to have a speedier and faster review process as the clinical trial data actually becomes available. So companies can apply for breakthrough therapy designation even before the phase 1 clinical trial, and certainly are expected to do this no later than the end of phase 2 trial meetings with the FDA. And of course, the goal is here to help accelerate the clinical trial programs and streamline and align with the FDA. When the FDA receives such a request, it has to respond within 60 days. And that also, of course, is in line with the intent that these types of regulatory pathways help to accelerate the availability of a critically needed medicine, as we are dealing again with treating serious conditions in a faster manner, so that patients can benefit as rapidly as possible from these new medications. Since I try to cover global regulatory environments, switching from FDA now over to Europe, where the European Medicines Agency is in charge of the review and approval of medicines to be placed onto the European market, there are, of course, equivalent, although not entirely similar, regulatory pathways for medicines in development to reach patients earlier. And the EMA, European Medicines Agency, have implemented this through the so-called PRIME scheme, or the priority medicines, which includes for drugs that are eligible for this the following benefits. So also an accelerated assessment, as well as fostering early dialogue with the EMA for the purposes of planning the clinical trials to obtain ultimately the data that the agency will need in order to do a rapid and efficient review and then approval. Just as we have seen for the FDA, not just any drug would be eligible for any of the faster regulatory review approval pathways. Also for the Prime Medicines scheme, there are certain requirements that must be met. And the target is actually here, the medicine to be eligible must address an unmet medical need. So this is somewhat equivalent to the serious condition that we have just seen with regards to the FDA. An unmet medical need, well, is any type of disease that for which no treatment currently exists, or the treatment results of the available therapies are, well, relatively poor. So just to highlight a few key points under the Prime scheme is, of course, to enable medicines to reach patients earlier. No doubt about that. And how is this achieved, you may ask? So this is the EMA offering through the Prime scheme proactive support to developers of new drugs and medicines with the aim of optimizing the generation of clinical data that clearly demonstrates the benefits as well as the risks of these new drugs, and to enable an accelerated assessment which will then result in availability of the drug in an accelerated and faster way. The Prime Medicine scheme provides the following benefits to companies applying for this designation. On the one hand, the companies developing innovative drugs that meet an unmet clinical need benefit from having a dedicated person, either a so-called rapporteur from the Committee of Medicinal Products for Human Use, or CHMP, being assigned, or in case of advanced therapies, they will then have a person from that group basically being assigned to help build the knowledge about this medicine ahead of the obtaining the marketing authorization. And this will also include, amongst other benefits, scientific advice from EMA and its members to help develop the clinical milestones that again will help an accelerated review and approval process, all with the aim of providing the marketing authorization for these critically needed medicines much faster than otherwise would be possible. I hope this video was interesting and useful to you as an investor. You see, anytime a company is able to obtain breakthrough designation, or in Europe the Prime Medicines designation, this generally means the company has a very innovative and very promising drug on their hand. Of course, this still doesn't mean that the drug will be approved in the end. There's always a risk that it may not, but overall, I hope that the information provided in this video will help you along your investment journey. If you like this content, please consider liking the video and subscribing to my channel.